Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another thing where I talk about things. Today, I wanted to talk about the concept of conservatism versus liberalism, and kind of some rather interesting quirks about the very definition of the two phrases. The reason why I'm thinking about this is because I was on 4chan not too long ago, and I saw somebody complaining, and they said, why is it that 4chan is so conservative? You know, they were just kind of irritated because they had some kind of political view, and people didn't agree with them, and they thought of themselves as a liberal, and they said, you know, why is 4chan so conservative? You know, how did this happen? Like, shouldn't they all be young people? Aren't young people traditionally, like, liberal? And you know, they were just kind of irritated. And I was thinking about that. And I was also thinking about, you know, like there are a lot of people on 4chan who kind of get up there, and some of them are libertarians, you know, which are people who believe that the government should stay out of their lives, pretty much. They don't want to pay taxes, they don't want the government telling them what to do, so on and so forth. Libertarians, and they're always complaining about liberals. You know, liberals, I want to get my business. They always want to get my business. They want to take away all my money. They want to give it to other people, and you know, libertarians. And then, of course, there's also horseshoe politics, where you think about how when you get to either side of an extreme, like when you get to the far right, you find like neo-Nazis, the Ku Klux Klan or whatever, and they're very conservative, you know, they want, you know, like I disagree with these groups, and I think these groups should be excluded from government and politics and everything else. And then you get to the far left, and there are the same thing, you know, like I disagree with these groups, I disagree with, you know, all white cis men, you know, blah, 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 blah. And it's the same kind of thing, like they're both sort of, like on the far extremes, they're both sort of just crazy, and they just want to stop people from doing things that they don't like. You know, that's the whole idea behind it. And I thought it was a little bit weird to think that when you get to the far side of conservatism and the far side of liberalism, that for whatever reason they should basically be functionally the same. You think that there would be some kind of distinction between the two that set them apart and made it to where, like, what's more liberal about hating, like, why would being sexist, why is being sexist more liberal than being racist? You know, like, and why is racism more conservative than, and I started thinking about the definitions, and there's social liberalism, and there's like a classical liberalism, which has to do more with the law, and so on and so forth. And there's also divisions between Europe and the US. And I think that in the States, what I ultimately concluded is that none of it actually makes any sense. It's all just kind of words, and they really don't mean anything. What it boils down to these days, I feel like, at least in the States, is pretty much just factional politics. Is people are just kind of part of a faction, and conservative is the faction that they belong to, and liberal is a faction that you belong to, which is why you can actually be incredibly morally conservative, you can be very socially conservative, and still call yourself a liberal, even though none of your ideals are fundamentally liberal, in a way. That's the thing that I think makes no sense. But for starting off, though, I thought I would just kind of talk about like my perspective on the kind of thing. In classical liberalism, the idea behind liberalism is that you've got free speech, you know, free religion. Everybody's kind of free to do what they're supposed to do, and this is supposedly what the left side of our government does, the U.S. government. The Democrats are supposed to be in favor of free speech, you know, access to education, you know, free information, stuff like that. And that's why you see in our lobby systems, the Democrats are typically funded by the school systems or by the media and so on and so forth. Whereas the Republicans are supposed to be more conservative, more legally conservative, you would expect. What they focus on is they want to reduce taxes, they want to shrink the size of government, they want to try to, you know, get rid of the excess and the extra weight. And of course they get support from like business, because business has trouble with regulations, like they lose money to regulations, they can lose profits to regulations, so they want to get rid of some regulations, they want to shrink down the government, do less paperwork, save money, pay less taxes, so on and so forth. So the Republicans, you know, tend to be more of a pro-business sort of deal. Sort of, depending on the business. But what's come of that, though, is I feel like they're really not, our politics has gotten so kind of based on the lobby system that in practice they really don't exemplify many of those traits that you originally would associate with liberalism and conservatism. For one thing, I mean, like, if you look kind of at the whole media thing, like the media companies support the Democrats, they support the left wing, who are traditionally liberal, and this makes sense because they're in favor of freedom of speech. You know, the news media is allowed to do what they do, and the Democrats are supposedly, they're liberal, so they would, you know, fight for the news to do whatever it is that the news does, and the news can go out and they can report, you know, whatever they want, as long as it's something that causes damage, and so on and so forth. And so, of course, they support that, but then what happens is the media companies then turn around and because they're a big lobby, they ask for financial support for a copyright thing. They say, we want SOPA, we want PIPA, we want the TPP to include copyright provisions that are incredibly harsh. You know, we want people to go to prison more frequently when they download music and stuff like that. And copyright, if you think about it, is actually not very classically liberal. Copyright kind of is actually more of a restriction of freedom of speech. It sort of says, you know, you can't say these things, somebody else owns that idea, you know, this, legally speaking, this is forbidden to you. And the more that copyright law expands, the more that you're kind of getting away from liberalism. So, you know, you find the Democrats are kind of doing things where they are getting away from liberalism, the concepts of liberalism. And the same thing goes with schools, is you find that the Democrats also get a lot of funding from schools. They get tons of money thrown at them from the private aspects of the schooling industry. So like McGraw-Hill, for example, a textbook company, they sell us all these textbooks. They throw a bunch of funding at the Democrats, and then the Democrats say, oh yes, Common Core, we'll release this Common Core program. And of course, Common Core has not been tested at all whatsoever. It's been a mess since the rollout. But McGraw-Hill had to print a bunch of new textbooks for this Common Core thing, and so McGraw-Hill made a lot of money. And this was probably a bad idea. I mean, from what I've seen of Common Core, it looks kind of frustrating. It looks like it makes it harder for parents to help their kids with homework. You know, I didn't think it was all that great of a plan. But you get into things like that, and you realize that because they're kind of in bed with the school system, you know, the unions and everything else like that, that the Democrats are probably not going to be the party that ever nationalizes the education system. Probably. I mean, there are some Democrats who do still kind of espouse those views, but the ones that are taking money from the education system, like the people who are making money by printing these textbooks and selling them, or people who are making a killing, you know, in tuition fees or whatever through these private colleges, things like that, any politician taking money from those lobbies, they're really not going to support, you know, open and free education. It's not going to be a thing that they get behind. They're not really very liberal politicians. What they might be is socially liberal. And socially liberal, that would be like, you know, still you have your freedom of speech and your freedom of religion. I mean, they really don't support the freedom of speech because they support expanding copyright law, but at least you can, you know, do whatever you want as far as your religion goes. And the socially liberal people are more open to things like gay marriage and whatnot because they're all about kind of social freedoms. But then you get into the weirdness where you have like the feminist movement. And there's different branches of feminism. There's different types. Some of them are more about freedom, you know. And you find that they're more like, you know, I'm a woman and I want to get involved into things, and I feel like I should be able to do things. And but there's also, I believe they usually attribute this to second wave feminism. But honestly, I've given up on trying to figure out which ones are which. It just depends on who you're talking to. But there are very conservative feminists who are focused on more like men have too much power. Men shouldn't be able to say certain things. Men shouldn't be able to do certain things. You know, and they're just kind of mad at men or whatever. And you see them. I mean, you can't deny that they're out there and that some of them are popular. You know, they're angry about sex work, pornography, whatever. And in a lot of those areas, like they've been fighting pornography for ages, for years. Some of these lobbies have been trying to get laws passed against pornography since before I was born. But those actually, they're socially conservative because they kind of hold this view that we need to reduce the amount of freedom people have to do certain things. Like we don't want to see titties on the TV because what'll happen? Society will collapse. Men will just take titties for granted, and then who knows what? It's a slippery slope straight down to titty hell. And you know, it's socially conservative, but those groups, the socially conservative feminist lobbies, still kind of appeal to the left because the left is not the right. Basically, it's just the side of politics that's going to jive with them, if at all. They don't have as many friends though. You find, like I say, we found this out pretty much in. I would say that the whole thing, the whole fiasco with the gaming stuff, probably maybe did reveal that social conservatism tends to have a hard time finding friends. People don't like having their freedoms encroached on. They really just don't like it when people show up and they say you can't do things. And this is what I saw. It was something related to this that I saw on 4chan that I thought was just weird. Somebody like, you know, people shouldn't be able to do things. It was one of those, stop liking what I don't like, and they were mad about it. And then somebody told them off, and they were like, don't tell me what to do. And they got mad, and they were like, how can 4chan be so conservative? And I just thought to myself how odd it was that person considered themselves a liberal, even though what they were fundamentally espousing was just a socially conservative view, like people shouldn't be able to do things because they don't, these freedoms are harmful, these freedoms are bad, It's not socially liberal, it's socially conservative. But then on the other hand, I think that maybe that whole gaming fiasco actually confused some politicians' aides, because Ted Cruz, I don't know if anybody, I don't know how big of a news this was, but it got on like the Yahoo feed and so on, and I read a little bit about this. But Ted Cruz came out, and Ted Cruz was like, I am a gamer, I play video games. I don't know what exactly it is that he thinks he plays. I can't really imagine a senator would have a lot of time to play video games, so I thought this was almost kind of comical. And I know I wasn't the only one, because this got on the V board of 4chan, where people were posting about Ted Cruz. They're like, Ted Cruz says he's a gamer now, guys. And everybody was like, yeah, Ted Cruz is a gamer, I sure believe that. But I believe that what happened is they got just as confused as the same person that I was talking to on 4chan about the conservatism thing. Where they were like, men, you shouldn't be able to see naked women, conservatives. That's conservative. And then they said, if you want to see naked women, then you're a conservative. And so maybe Ted Cruz's aides got confused, and they were like, so Senator Cruz, men want to see boobs. They're socially conservative, clearly. And so now, like, you've got these conservative politicians that think that gamers are part of their constituency. Because for whatever reason, like, because gamers don't want to be told what to do, surely they must want to vote Republican. And this is just weird. It's kind of like where you start to realize that the lines have gotten so fuzzy that even the professionals don't actually know what's conservative and what's liberal anymore. Because even, like I say, even within feminism, I'm not like, I've ragged a bit on feminism in the past, but mostly it's this socially conservative stuff that kind of bugs me. I'm not real in favor of it. But there are feminists that believe that, sex should be encouraged, and so on and so forth. They're very pro-sex. There's pro-sex feminism. And so you'd find that there might be, like, pro-sex feminists that want to play games, and they just want more, like, options. And those people, I think, tend to be generally cool. Like, if you go on V, and you're like, I just want to have, like, more armor sets in a game. Like, if I'm going to play a game, I just want more armor sets. Like, you can keep the chainmail bikinis, but I want more armor sets, more choices. Most people would be cool with that. I mean, like, nobody loses anything, everybody gains something, although the game company has to put in more work. But you find that those people are generally well accepted. And again, I think it's kind of like, what's funny was the whole political thing. It all got to be so focused on factions. Who was on which side? Were you conservative, or were you, are you liberal? Are you progressive? And it got to where I don't think that anybody actually knew what any of the sides meant. They just kind of took side, and they maybe didn't even agree with each other politically. I was thinking about how Anita Sarkeesian is very much, she's actually anti-sex. She's a sex-negative feminist. But then you got into, like, Zoe Quinn. And I'm not saying this is not a rumor, this was confirmed. She did sex work. Zoe Quinn was a sex worker previously. She did nude photo shoots and then sold them to websites. And so they kind of are at odds with each other, these two particular, branches of feminism. And yet they joined together in a political sense because, Gamergate appeared to be against feminism, and so they were the enemy. And even though, like I know I said when that whole thing came out, that the two sides probably could have reached across the aisle. Like, they had things in common. There really, I think with the more moderate people or the more sensible people, there really wasn't that much to fight about. But the fighting just got to be factional because the more radical people on either side of the thing began a shouting match, and they tried to draw lines, and they tried to establish, this is us and this is them. And it got to where the actual political views, the actual values that anybody had ceased to matter. You just kind of were on one side or the other, and it didn't matter if you were conservative or if you were liberal. Like, Anita Sarkeesian is conservative, she's more conservative, and Zoe Quinn would be probably more liberal, based on what I read. And you had people on 4chan who were very liberal, and they were supporting Gamergate, or people elsewhere who were, supporting Gamergate. But then you also had, like, Breitbart, which was an extremely conservative periodical that was supporting Gamergate. They're very much pro right-wing politics. So it just got to be very muddled, very weird. And then Senator Ted Cruz came out and said, "I'm a gamer." I'll get the gamer vote for sure now that I've said that I'm a gamer. And I honestly can't, like I said, I can't imagine what he plays. like I say, though, in Europe, though, you find that they stick more to kind of the classical interpretations of liberalism and conservatism. Like, you find that that in Europe, they focus more on individual freedoms, and usually that means kind of like freedom from government. Like, you know, I don't want to be taxed, don't take my money and then just redistribute it to me. They're focused kind of more on being free from their own government. So you find that the liberals in Europe are the ones who are oftentimes more likely to try to cut public spending for stuff like, you know, schools or welfare or whatever, because the idea is that people should be free from government. You know, you shouldn't be heavily taxed, you shouldn't be a slave to government, so on and so forth. In the US, we look at the liberals as the people who are actually trying to instate more welfare. And so it's kind of a reversal of thinking. In terms of classical liberalism, we have less classical liberalism in general in the States. Generally speaking, because of our lobbies are so strong, we generally just tend to be very pro-business. That's kind of our thing. The US is very pro-business. Whereas other countries, you might see more socialism, more populism. The US is just pretty much focused on who can provide money, and who can provide the most money, actually, is kind of what we're doing. In fact, right now, the whole lobbying thing has gotten so bad that the Republican National Committee is starting to comment on it. They're sort of noting that they're becoming obsolete because these wealthy, you know, like bajillionaires are throwing so much money at pet politicians that these pet politicians, they're able to use these networks established. Like, for example, the Koch families have these data networks that they've established, and they're more efficient than the Republican National Party. So you're getting politicians now who are drifting away from the Republican base in any sense at all, and they're just kind of getting funding from these giant, you know, multi-million-dollar national, you know, like these companies or these people, these individuals, and they become pet politicians. And whatever they're supporting, you know, it's maybe liberal, it's maybe conservative. It's not really unified anymore. They're starting to sort of just come apart and sort of separate. And the trouble is that what some analysts are saying is they don't think that there's really like a good guy in the whole thing. The Democrats are going to start doing this as well. Because if you're paying attention to Hillary Clinton, right now they're on her case because she's taking millions of dollars in donations from foreign countries. And they're kind of doing it through a bit of a shell game. Like, you know, they take this money in through these corporations, you get the PACs and everything else like that. And it's sort of like, well, we're not coordinating with these foreign nations, but sort of they are. And I've read articles written by lobbyists or consultants and, you know, so forth, that talk about how pretty much in the US, if a country isn't lobbying the government, if they aren't paying a politician, then odds are they don't really have much voice, and they don't really get a lot of attention in our politics, because that's kind of how our politicians function these days, is just like, are they getting money from something? If yes, then they support this political view. And I think that in the States, this is probably where we really just come apart. We're really not about a particular approach to government anymore. It's kind of more about the money. It's more about the lobbies. So you know we've just got the two-party system. It's all we've got. And if both of them are just being bought and sold, then you just get, you know, just whatever the pet millionaire wants to do. That's kind of what gets supported. So it's not totally universal though. One of the things that's optimistic about this is I kind of talk about the money and stuff like that. And it's getting a little out of whack in some places. I mean, like, the people who are taking advantage of it get a pretty major advantage. But there are politicians who don't like it, and there are politicians that talk about it. It's just that you almost never hear about that sort of thing. Like I say, the Republican National Committee is starting to speak up about it. They're starting to express some concern. And what you'll find is that, for the most part, the news, everything you read in the news, is just going to be probably the more sensational stuff. And when they talk about this stuff kind of privately, like, you'll find that politicians may very well be as angry as the average citizen about certain kinds of laws. They might be smaller deal. They may not have a pet millionaire backing them, and so the ones that don't have pet millionaires don't like this new pet millionaire system of lobbying, and so they're kind of upset about it. So there's still people who kind of follow these more traditional liberal conservative views. But what's interesting though is that because they're becoming more blurry, and they really don't make as much sense, you know, they're becoming less and less sensical. You find that now politicians are kind of starting to ask themselves, like, do I want to run as a Republican or do I want to run as a Democrat? And they could kind of go either way, because depending on how you spin it, you can make either view sound like a view that your party supports. For example, like I mentioned, the Libertarians are actually classical liberals. They're maybe not, they're not social liberals, they tend to be socially conservative, but you could still spin a lot of democratic ideals to the libertarians if you wanted to kind of throw it at them. Things like, you know, free speech and maybe reduction of copyright law and things like that. They tend to strongly value property rights, so copyright law might be a harder sell for it. But if you kind of put it in the context of, you know, this is government telling you what to do, telling you what you can and cannot say. You know, we need the public to just have access to this information. You could probably even sell public schools to them, you know, just be like, we just know, you know, like, we want this to belong to you. We want this to be like local schools, local universities, you know, these are your people, these belong to you. You have, you know, your local city. Which again could be a hard sell because a lot of them think of those as liberal values, even though they are classical liberals in a sense. But even the Republican Party, they really don't support the small government views. I know in Texas just recently they passed a law, like a local city passed a law that said that fracking industries couldn't come into their city anymore. Because what the fracking industry was doing is they were trying to buy up land from people, so they'd come in and they'd say, hey, I want some of your land. And so people would sell their land, and the fracking industry could lay down pipes or whatever and do their fracking kind of on somebody's property. And so the city thought that, well, that's not good, because if like my neighbor sells their land to a fracking company, now I've got to deal with being next to a fracking industry, and this is kind of a pain. I'm really not happy about that. So they made it illegal to sell your land to the fracking industry. They just said, you know, as a whole, this city is a no fracking city. We're not going to do it. We're not interested in that. So that's what the city voted for. So the state government came in, the Texas state government came in, and they made it illegal for the city to decide that they were going to be a no fracking zone. They said, we want people to have their individual freedoms, and they deserve to decide whether or not they're going to have their land fracked. And so they abolished this city law. And so this was actually kind of an expansion of government power. It was funny because they spun it. They used the rhetoric to spin it as though it was conserving government power. You know, they're saying, like, we want people to have this in their own hands. And it's kind of weird, because it was a higher government power exerting its authority over local power, which is counterintuitive. You know, theoretically you shouldn't see that from conservatives, but they're pro-business, you know, they're pro-corporate. The fracking industry pays them a lot of money, the fracking industry complained, so therefore the fracking industry got what they wanted. And I think that in US politics these days, the thing to look at anymore is not really whether or not a politician is liberal or conservative. And this is hard. I think that a lot of people, it would be really hard to get people to come around to this kind of perspective, to sort of look at politics as being more just to think of politics as a shell game. Like, the whole thing's just a great big shell game. Like, everything they say, when they say they're going to do something, what they probably mean to do is something else. Like, for example, you look at Obama has been a big supporter of ecology, right? Like, he talks about, well, you know, I'm going to get down these global warming gases and things like that. But then he was a huge supporter for the TPP. And the TPP, it's a trade agreement. What they were trying to do is they were trying to get access to Asian markets, like in Vietnam and more in China and whatnot. China originally wasn't going to sign on to the TPP, but they started to look at it towards the end there. What they're trying to do is they're trying to get into, like, Vietnam and some of these other countries, because there are no human rights regulations and there's no environmental regulations. So it's cheap to do industry in some of these countries. What they can do is they can build these factories and just belch, you know, soot, smoke, carcinogens into the air. They don't care, you know, dump tires into the rivers. They just do the most disgusting, heinous things to their environment in these countries, because there's no regulations in those countries yet. China, they're starting to discuss it, because the health hazards from the heavy industry has gotten so bad, people are starting to get legitimately very sick. So people are starting to get really angry about the heavy industry in China. Although they kind of, it seems like they sort of want to postpone regulating it, because their economy is starting to hit a slump, and they don't want to slow down their industry. So now they're trying to sort of disperse their industry without regulating it, so that the pollution isn't so concentrated. But the point is, though, what the TPP is looking to do is it's trying to get American companies access to poor regulations. They want to go to countries that have really bad environmental standards, so that they can just, you know, cheaply produce, you know, whatever it is that they're producing. They can make coat hangers and not worry about what's happening to the environment. So you get this sort of strangeness where like Obama, he's up there and he's like, yeah, I'm gonna fix global warming, you know, and then he gets behind this TPP thing and it's like, oh yeah, no, trust me, the environmental regulations are gonna be in there, and the TPP is just being written by the corporate lawyers and like nobody else. So there's really kind of almost no way that it's gonna be properly regulated. They're probably not gonna look out for the environment. I do kind of wonder though, like the politicians don't have time. I know that Ted Cruz doesn't have time to play video games, so because most of the politicians don't have time to actually get really in depth with all the stuff that they're doing. This is one of the reasons why the president tends to die 20 years younger than the average person, but he's just pretty much bombarded constantly with various, you know, needs and things, and people just tell him things, and his aides tell him what's going on. And so maybe I kind of wonder if maybe Barack Obama really believes that there's going to be these environmental regulations in this bill. Like if he gets the TPP through, maybe he really believes that we'll get into Vietnam and the TPP will make it to where they regulate all the ecological damage away. Maybe he thinks this. Personally, I don't think this, because our corporations wouldn't really want to get into Vietnam very badly if it, you know, if the labor and the regulations were equal to the U.S. Because what would be the point of going all the way over to Asia to produce coat hangers if you could just do the same thing in the States with the same regulations and the same, you know, same labor wages? They wouldn't do it. They wouldn't care. So pretty much that law, I just don't think that trade agreement, I don't think they have any intention of upholding any kind of real ecological protections or anything like that. I'm pretty sure it's all just it's just kind of a scam. But maybe they told Obama, maybe they told him, though, that this was going to be his big thing. And maybe he really believed that he was going to push this through and he was going to help the environment. He was going to, you know, it was going to be a major monumental thing. Because it seems like he really believes in it. When he goes and he does his speeches, he keeps saying this. He keeps saying, like, you know, really, like, it's not a scam. It's really not a trick. I really, like, really. And he's mad. He's mad at the Democrats who don't support him. And this is what's really wacky about it, is the Democrats are all trying to fight him on this bill. And again, this is where I say it's just weird, is you look at, like, Obama is supporting something that his whole party, his own party, is just kind of stalwartly against, and they're fighting him against it. The divisions between liberalism and conservatism, between left and right, they're starting to get really blurry. It's all kind of just becoming more about money. And yeah, again though, on a concluding note, it's not everybody. The whole system's not entirely corrupt to the bone. There are people who are in the system who don't believe this sort of stuff. Some of them are just candidates that are already in there. I mean, they're representatives that are just hanging around, and they're in Congress, and they actually go and they make speeches and they complain. But the trouble is that they go and they make speeches to empty rooms, and then somebody else's aides come by and they take notes and they write it, so they can make this impassioned plea, and they can talk and like they could rail on this politician or that politician, or they could talk about this thing or that thing. But unless they can find time to actually sit down and make appointments and talk to each other face to face, and in fact you read about the TPP, you find that Nancy Pelosi actually might have been instrumental in blocking the TPP, because she made personal appointments with a variety of Democratic congressmen and talked to them about why she's got such an issue with the TPP. They said that this was actually one of the major things that prevented it from happening. But otherwise what they do, though, unless they can make those appointments, they just kind of go to an empty room, and they shout at an empty room for a while, but they record it, and then later on, like, these congressional aides will come in, and they'll take notes, and they'll go and they'll relay the information. They'll be like, yeah, Nancy Pelosi's really mad. And they, you know, there's not really as much passion, there's not really as much this or that, they kind of just summarize it. So that's why these personal appointments are a big deal. Also, too, you'll find that sometimes politicians are really mad. Like if you watch their stuff, they might very well be railing on Barack Obama, and you would never hear about it because they just get up there and they're just like, I have tried to make an appointment with this guy for like a year now, and he just keeps blowing me off, and they're mad about this sort of thing. And it might be somebody in the Democratic Party who's trying to get in touch with Obama, and they just can't do it, and they're angry, and maybe they have some like really legitimate thing, but you'll never hear about it because it's just kind of politics as usual. It's not very sensational. It's just the way that they function, and yeah, so it's complicated, but just something that I was, I've been thinking about over this past week or so, and yeah, So that's it, I guess. Thanks for joining me tonight, everybody. You guys have a good night. I think I flipped over into my stream thing. Whatever. You guys have a good day, good night, whatever the case.